Welcome to Everyday Economics, the podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, president of the 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network. You can listen to all of our terrific podcasts at americastalking.com. To support Everyday Economics, please make your tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We are recording today's episode on Friday, September 8th, and joining me as always, my friend and colleague, Dr. Orphe Divounguy, PhD economist. Dr. O, we talk about a number of things in this show. We try to stay contemporary to the news and absolutely, there are some headlines that stand out above others. One that you identified and shot my way. You spent a lot more time looking and thinking about Canada than I do. It's not even hockey season yet. When it is hockey season, I spend a fair amount of time thinking about
Let me
Canada.
tell you something. You'll be surprised what you learn from the Canadian economy. I mean, sometimes they're just ahead of us.
And sometimes they're not.
When you ask me to whip out my crystal ball, sometimes all I have to do is look north of the border.
From an experimentation standpoint with their economy, they do things that we wouldn't necessarily do here in the United States, although this is something that we've kind of done in the United States, what we're about to talk about. But we've maybe just done it in a sort of a different way with a different case study group. Anyway, lifting the veil on what it is that I want to talk about is this study that I believe was conducted by the University of British Columbia. And the study itself was what would happen if you gave a group of homeless people, 50 of them total, $7,500 each, and then gave them no direction on how to use it, or to, there's no guidance or steering or anything like that. You just gave them the money, and you were pleasantly surprised, to share with me that didn't work out all so bad.
Yeah.
Am I underselling it?
No. I listen. I'm not just pleasantly surprised. I'm excited by the result. I think that's a great result, and of course we can talk about the study in more detail. But I think it's a fantastic result to be able to say, look, ultimately, a lot of these people, these homeless people, need housing, and they need housing in order to be able to get a job and to put themselves together. And so helping them with the kind of the minimum, right, to get on that bottom rung of the ladder is a necessary step. It's something we should consider. So
the study itself, which, according to the story I'm reading from the National Post of Canada, is published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, found that recipients spent 99 fewer days homeless and spent 55 more days in stable housing. They also retained $1,160, and these are all Canadian figures, right? I mean, it's Canadian dollars, right? In savings, more in savings. So, I mean, the criticism of the study, just to kind of get this out of the way is that that this is maybe this just isn't indicative of a reality if put into play with a larger group. That in a study group that you might see numbers like this that would be maybe more encouraging than the reality of an actual program if initiated on broad scale. What I think is interesting about it, the study itself, though, is that we've talked about universal basic income and the idea of basically, being fed, a check every, so often, almost like literally like a paycheck to not work, to give you, whatever the number is. I mean, I believe it, when Andrew Yang was running, he was talking about $12,000 a year for every American. This study was lump sum. They gave this group of 50 people 7,500 Canadian dollars at one time. And so, what are your takeaways?
Yeah, first of all, I'm very aware of the National Post article that basically called this a flawed experiment. I think that the person who wrote that article, it clearly doesn't understand science. It's kind of interesting. You always say ignorance is bliss. It's kind of interesting that the non-scientists are usually the ones calling other studies flawed and scientific. Look, the point of the experiment is not necessarily to see whether or not we can implement this or across markets, in different territories, across different types of people. The whole point of the experiment was to try to figure out whether or not a cash transfer could work, right, under certain circumstances. So they called it, the National Post writer called it a flawed experiment because the study excluded people with mental health issues and with substance abuse issues, right? Those are what we call in science confounding factors. And if I'm trying to figure out whether or not the cash transfer, of course, the cash transfer is going to have what's called heterogeneous effects, all right? The effects are going to vary differently across individuals, across areas. Maybe the Vancouver study might not work in the Seattle or Portland region, right?
Right.
It's going to have different effects on different groups. But if we are trying to isolate the impact of the cash transfer, we want to, at least on a small scale, we want to at least try to get rid of all these other factors that might actually influence the outcome, right? And so, yes, this was a very controlled experiment with, looking at just a small group of people that don't have these other factors that could be a cause for why they're homeless in the first place. Okay. And just to look at whether or not the cash transfer on people who don't have substance abuse issues, on people who don't have mental health issues, would actually work to help them get their, get into stable housing, right? Whether this is going to work on people with mental health issues or substance abuse is beyond the scope of the study, right? It would be interesting to find out in a different study whether or not, what the outcome, what the implications would be for the other group. The other thing I want to mention is that the majority of homeless...
Let me pause you to agree with you. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I think that that's what the biggest criticism that you could level against this study is that you take the perfect case group and you give them you give them seed money to get to pull themselves up and out of the situation that they're in. I mean, I would hope that would be the case, that because the part of this, and not to go too deep into it, but part of this study was a perception survey that went along with it before they started, where the vast majority of people who heard about this idea said this is a terrible idea, and like 81% of them, I think it says in the National Post story, said that if the homeless received an unconditional cash transfer, that they would spend some percentage of that on alcohol, drugs, and tobacco if they were homeless rather than if they were housed.
Yeah, let me add something really important. I think really important to mention here is the majority of the homeless are not. Let me say that again, and I want everybody to hear me on the podcast. Are not suffering some substance abuse, from mental health issues. The majority of the homeless are people just like you and I, who may be single mothers, who have fallen behind on their rent payment because of a shock, because of having lost a job, because rent growth is up 31% in just the last 2 or 3 years, right? And so these are people just like you and I who are falling behind, and they're just trying to make ends meet. And so they face an eviction. And once you face an eviction once, right, it stays on you, stays with you forever. Research shows that, if you face an eviction, you're less likely to be able to get another place to live. Like, landlords are screening like crazy. They screen. They say, oh, hold on a second. Have you ever been evicted? Have you ever faced a bankruptcy? Have you ever, right? What's your credit score? All of these requirements are preventing a lot of people, just like you and I, who may have had fallen on bad luck, preventing them from being able to find stable housing again, right? And by the way, let me just add another thing. Sometimes the mental health issues and substance abuse come as a result of, right? As a result of having fallen on bad luck. Not It's not the other way around.
I think that's an understated part of this problem. I mean, it's not simple. The solutions are not simple. This is an interesting study, and I think there's something to be taken from it. We got to call it to an end, but that was a good conversation.
Yes. But I think this is one of these issues that very, very important that we talk about because the stereotypes are harmful, they're terrible, and ultimately, a lot of people, and I know a lot of people doing good work, helping the homeless, helping people who have faced a recent eviction. Find stable housing, and those people actually make it. They do very well. You find them a home, they get back to work, and they thrive. And so our system is broken in the sense that, if you had a period of bad luck, it's very difficult to find stable housing again because, of all the screening, landlords don't want to do that. There are tools out there, great tools. And I'm going to put a plug here for a great organization I'm part of, I work with, Housing Connector, right? Can you imagine if there were a renter of last resort that would actually go out to property managers and landlords and say, hey, you know what? If you house this person, if just in the event that they fall behind on rent or anything like that, we'll step in and cover that rent for them and keep them housed so that, right, they don't fall back through the cracks. Guess what? It's working great. Housing Connector has housed thousands of people already that way. And those people are thriving. They're not falling behind on their rent. They're working, right? They're finding jobs. They're finding opportunity and they're doing very well. So sometimes just a little helping hand is all it takes. And if we're serious about fixing the homelessness crisis in our major cities in America.
I appreciate your thoughts as always. For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other high-quality podcasts at americastalking.com.